Hello, and welcome to the My Spiritual Friends podcast. I'm your host, Joni Lorraine. And here at My Spiritual Friends, we delve into our spiritual journeys and discover how sharing these experiences with others can lead to personal growth and flourishing. This season, we're shining a light on the spiritual lives of the LGBTQ+ community. We'll explore what it means to be both spiritual and gay, and discuss how we can build connections that support the unique and authentic spiritual needs of this incredible community. If you find value in the conversation today, please like and subscribe to the podcast. Your support means the world to me. And for more insights and resources, visit my website at jonilorraine.com and subscribe to my Substack at spiritualdirection.substack.com. If you feel inspired to contribute, I gratefully accept your donations at buymeacoffee.com/Joni Lorraine. Enough of that. Now let's embark on this journey together. I invite you to sit alongside me as we visit with my spiritual friends. I am so grateful to be with you on this beautiful day, and I am excited to be here with Jere Farrell. Now let me tell you a little bit about Jere. Reverend Jere Farrell was born in Ireland, and he spent the first 25 years of his life there growing up in the traditional Roman Catholic home. And as a child, he had conversations with both Jesus and Mary and visual encounters with them in his mind's eye. And at age 17, he attempted suicide because of his realization that he was gay. And fortunately, and obviously, he failed in that attempt, and instead had a oneness experience with expanded consciousness and knowledge of his divine nature. He studied to be a Roman Catholic priest and came to the United States in 1983. And in 2000, he took a leave of absence from the priesthood and became a non-denominational hospice chaplain. And shortly after that, he met his now husband, and they've been together for 23 years, marrying in 2008 when it became legal. And he started attending the local Unity Center in 2003, started working at that Unity Center in 2005, and entered the field licensing and ordination program, from which he graduated in 2010. He's been a senior minister within the Unity movement since 2011, and he's passionate about assisting others to discover their true divine self. Welcome, Jere. I'm so grateful you are here today.
Well, likewise, it's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us, Jere, is there something you might like to expand upon in terms of your spiritual journey so we can get to know you a little better?
Well, it's been quite the journey. And the part that I just sort of went back to as you were reading it was the childhood piece where, I would be out in the garden playing among the flowers, and I would be in this happy place when I realized it was really a place of oneness. It wasn't a place of separation, and Jesus would be there with me, and not necessarily talking to me, but like alongside me, and energetically something was going on there, friendship, love, whatever. And of course, I just thought everybody had that. I didn't know. And as I said, Mary would come and talk to me at nighttime when I would get into bed. So obviously that was something special that was given to me for whatever reason. And the stressing thing was that at 11 years of age, one morning I woke up and I knew that she was gone. It was like that connection had ended. And it was devastating. I remember being depressed, really more like an adult depression. And of course, being a child, it was like, oh, I wonder what I did wrong.
Did you ever share it with people?
Oh, yeah. Invariably, people would talk with me about their experiences in the congregation. And they would share that, they talked to Jesus all the time. He was real. He was, I suppose you could say, their imaginary friend, but he was real. And others, angels, or maybe even psychic abilities, that they would know things. And I also had that very sensitive side. I would tune in to energy without realizing what I was doing, and I would sort of know. And then, of course, I was always trying to be the peacemaker and always be the one who had analyzed the situation and now was trying to find a solution. So I think a lot of us would say that there's a lot of responsibility that we take on from those experiences. We think somehow we have to be the savior of the world, or at least our families or our immediate world. And, later in life, like when I was 17 and I had that amazing experience, again, it was all about oneness. And it was an expansion of consciousness that was very different than that childhood experience. And it truly was, the only way I can describe it, it's like having your mind blown, where the walls get blown away and you can feel the universe. You can sense the distance. You can traverse the consciousness of the whole universe, and you're it. And, later down the road, when I came across Unity and I started listening to their teachings, it was like, there's a church that talks this language and has it figured out, because in my little Catholic mind, I was out there in space and I'm looking at creation, and sort of saying, oh, creation is sort of like the Father, God, and there's this incredible love going back and forth between this being that I can't see, but it's like I said, I was like iron filings in front of a magnet that was just being like adored. It was incredible. And my little Catholic mind said, okay, so the love is the Spirit. Where's Jesus? And this voice said, you are. Now, I didn't get all that at the time. What it was telling me was that I was the second person of the Trinity. Like, I'm Christ, not Jesus, but, or you could say Jere Christ. And it wasn't until that I came across Unity that I was able to put two and two together for all of that. And that's why Unity just fit like a glove. It was like, okay, yeah. All the things that I experienced there when I was 17 suddenly fell into place and sense.
That's gorgeous. I'm envious that my spiritual experiences are not as mind-blowing as some folks. And that is okay. I'm okay with that. It's just a general envy. And I mention that only because it's so gorgeous, and that there are people all around us who do have these experiences, and to connect with them is beautiful. And it brings me to my next question, is reconciling that experience with religion and your sexual orientation. So can you share a little bit about that?
Well, I can. And hold on to that question, because I want to go back to what you just said, though, because it's a very important point, and many people don't realize this. But you have this absolutely mind-blowing oneness peak experience, and you can't recreate it.
Right.
And that is so frustrating, because you've been there, you've felt the fire, and you can't recreate it, and you can't go back. And actually, many people who have these type of experiences kill themselves because they can't live with the absence of that experience. So I've had a few moments where I was very down about the fact that I couldn't have that connection in real time whenever I needed it. But I never went, to that next step. But I've read literature on that, which I don't think a lot of people really are aware. It can be a lonely road, because it's like you literally be consumed by the divine and loved, and you know what it's like, and it obviously fuels your life, like it gives you purpose and it helps you to stay on track. I would never have endured all the things that I've endured if it hadn't been for that experience, because I'm not operating from faith anymore. It's like I know what this is. I know who I am. I know what I'm becoming, even though I'm not necessarily experiencing it right now. So your question again was?
The correlation that you clearly were eventually able to make between your spirituality, religion, and your sexual orientation.
Yeah. Well, the coming out piece fell into place once I knew who I was, because I knew then, I'm not just this gay person. I would never want to limit myself to that. So having this deeper identity, I was able to incorporate being gay as a piece. This is just an aspect of me, but it's not who I am. There's a much deeper self there. One of the books that influenced me a lot was John Fortunato's book, Embracing the Exile. And he talks about how gay people feel like they're in exile. They don't fit in. This world doesn't match. It's like being left-handed or something. You're always bumping into something that isn't fitting. And he described it as being in exile. But the beauty of that is that you can take it further and say we're all in exile. because we're all not fitting in because, it's in the world but not of it. And there's that sense of the much deeper being that we are, and yet you can't sort of live from that in this 3D world. It's too big. It doesn't fit into it. So that helped me a lot also. And I mean, when I was a Catholic priest, people would say all the time, "You're very different. You don't talk like other Catholic priests."
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was talking or preaching or whatever, I was coming from that experience that I had. And so what they were feeling was the transmission of that energy, of the knowingness. So it wasn't like a doctrine, or it wasn't a creed, or it wasn't all of that. And I will say too that there's even a little bit of guilt about having that experience. Because, I mean, I said, "God, if you're there, do something." And I mean, literally hadn't the words out of my mouth or in my mind said when, boom, this like energy just blasted through me. And I mean, it was Kundalini energy. I had no clue about any of that. It was years later before I read about Kundalini energy. But, people, when I'll tell my story sometimes and people say, "Well, I had a moment like that and I asked and nothing happened." So like, again, there's this, I don't know what to tell you. It's like, it's a little embarrassing. I feel a little guilty. Like, why did I get the whole enchilada and others didn't? So it's an interesting thing. And so I was coming from that place, I suppose you would say, of spiritual awareness and consciousness. Not that, I lived there. For about 6 months after the event, I was kind of in a blissful state, and then it started to wear off. And, Ken Wilber would talk about that in terms of you need to do the piece about growing up and the shadow work. And so, just because I had the highest awareness, that didn't solve everything. You have to go through the growing up and doing the shadow work and then the showing up to be present, with all of the different difficulties and challenges that one experiences.
Right. For those of us who don't know about Ken Wilber's work, can you briefly let us know a little bit about that?
Jeez, that's
I know.
the only way I tried to read The Theory of Everything. I got 30 pages and I put it down. I said, I can't retain the categories and the layers that, so I started watching YouTube. So basically, it's like a spiral, you could say, and that we all go through the same layer that civilization has gone through, and that every human being on the planet has to go through. And you progress up these layers of growth, natural sort of like stages of growth that we all go through, but then also becoming aware of the dark side, the shadow work, and that we have an unconscious and a subconscious, and that we must begin to explore that so that we can clear up more space for the awareness part then to develop. And that obviously there's input, like, I mean, I had a download, you could say, and we all tend to get these minor downloads, as we work our way through the shadow work and the growing up. And then it's all about showing up as a kind of an integral being. His whole thing is integral theory. And that's kind of like a model for anybody who's on the spiritual path. And I mean, he's been on it for, 50 years or so. And his thing is about including and transcending. And I love that because that's where so many of us, I think, started out. We were trying to overcome, and we're leaving that behind. I'm more mature. I'm more advanced. I don't need, like, an example could be, say, someone grew up in a Christian kind of church or whatever, and Scripture is now anathema. It's like, I want nothing to do with Scripture. Well, I think it was Mindy Audlin, who's a Unity minister, said, well, that's an allergy, and you have to
Yeah, right.
know your allergies, and you have
Yes.
to get over them. So that's the including. So wherever you've been, wherever you've come from, to be able to go back and include that where you are now. And of course, getting rid of the judgment, because otherwise it's like, oh, well, those people over there, I'm so far advanced than them. They're still back there, believing in whatever. And realizing that all of these things we can bring with us and up the ladder, so to speak, of awareness.
It seems to me there's a correlation in some respects between this growth and this inclusion and the allergy that some of us who are LGBTQ plus have to religion and spirituality. So can you share your experience or the correlation there, or any experiences you might have had with anyone else who experiences those challenges?
Yeah, sure. Certainly when I lived in San Francisco and I would be up in the city and meeting people, and I didn't necessarily talk about, who I was or what I was doing work-wise or things like that. But even now still, like, there are a lot of gay and lesbian people where I live. We've a big community for a rural setting. And there are some people who are, I can tell, like, they're almost aggressive with me and like almost angry as to why are you still a minister, when you're gay, because the church has done so much damage to the gay people. And it's a tough one. I kind of reconcile myself to saying that, you're not going to convert them in the sense of that they'll get over that attitude or that perception of spirituality. But on some occasions, I will, if it comes up in conversation, I'll certainly address it. But you're right, it's very challenging for some people. Like, they're done with religion and spirituality. All it ever brought them was.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, if I had someone like that in spiritual direction, wouldn't touch it. It's what is.
That brings me to another question about, in terms of spiritual direction. One of the things that I feel the work of spiritual direction is great for is those spiritual experiences where you can go and not feel alone in terms of talking about those,
Right.
and to work through any of those concerns or issues that we as LGBTQ people have in regard to how religion has treated us, and come to our own understanding of what spirituality is, of who God is, or what God is, or what the sacred is in our lives. In my sessions, I just like to say, what's sacred? What is sacred to you? What is holy to you? And it doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with religion particularly.
Yeah, and one of my big influences was Anam Cara by John O'Donoghue, another former Irish Catholic priest.
Yeah.
But he was a theologian and a poet, a lot deeper than me. He was a wonderful writer. But that book spoke about an ancient Celtic sort of tradition of being the soul friend who just walks alongside you, and you're telling your story, and then that person is acknowledging it and seeing you for what you are and what your experience has been, and then just kind of probing, maybe like, well, what about this or what about that in terms of that experience? And I love that about spiritual. It's interesting. I mean, spiritual directions, like, oh, you're directing people, like you're putting. No, I mean,
No, that's not. No.
it is a kind of a misnomer, but I'm sure it comes from a time when perhaps it was more directive, at least in the Catholic Church. But it's really being just a good friend, someone who walks with you and asks the deep, meaningful questions. That's what we all need, someone to talk over things with. And it may not be our partner. There may not be a complete match there, and you need someone who can go as deep as you want to go.
That's something that I mentioned when I described the work, that it's especially right now, how important it is for us to support one another in making meaning in our lives. And one of the chief reasons I thought that this kind of podcast would be great is because we need spiritual friends. We need those who we can have these conversations with, support us in making meaning, help us discern things. And we don't necessarily need therapy, or we don't want spiritual counseling, right?
That's a great point, because I mean, certainly in the Irish tradition, people visiting other neighbors in their homes, that sit around the fire, that talk, the great storytelling and chewing the cud, as we say, are in the pub. It was like, that is so much a part of the Irish tradition and culture. And I think that's how they got by. They didn't need therapists because they had these long-standing friendships where they stood at the counter drinking their pint and they talked it all out with some friend, or they sat by the fire over a cup of tea, Yeah. So it's a beautiful natural tradition. It's obviously changed too in Ireland.
Yeah, I get so much out of having conversations with people who want to sit with me and discern things and learn things and deepen and elevate their experience of flourishing, really is what it is.
The common language can be around energy, like you were saying. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be around religious themes or topics, but how are you experiencing life? The life that you are, the joy or the zeal or the whatever, how's that showing up for you in your life, and what are you doing to nurture that?
Right.
And like anything, it's like if you're doing healing work, you get a little bit of the healing yourself.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm in it for.
That's the juice.
Yeah, but it's also, I am of course one of those folks who are really pleased to help and support others. Enneagram 9.
Okay.
So that's a big deal for me.
Love the Enneagram. Yeah. Came across it first in Hawaii in 1990. And as a 1, like 2 minutes into it, he just started talking about the ones. And I turned and said, I'm a 1. And they said, how do you know you're a 1? I said, I know. I'm a 1. Classic.
A classic 1.
But it's a great base also, like if you do want to do some more structured stuff about the shadow work too,
So in terms of spiritual companioning, what would you offer up to someone who's LGBTQ who might want to explore spiritual companionship? And what might you offer up to a spiritual companion who is willing to work with LGBTQ folks but doesn't have an awareness of that particular demographic?
Well, I think obviously when you are LGBTQ yourself and you're with someone, there's just a common background, or some background at least, common understanding of what it's like to be in the world as someone who doesn't fit in, or as I said, like the example of being left-handed, that everything is set differently. And how upsetting that can be to your psyche, and the amount of effort and overcoming that you kind of have to do. I was studying counseling psychology back in the late 90s, and I came across an article, the Cass model of coming out. And I'm not sure, but I think it's the same person who is now doing the report in England on the trans issues and that, because it's a Cass report. And she's an Australian social worker. And that article I have reproduced, I don't know how many times, to give to people, because it's a process of coming out, and that you kind of have to go through these steps to come out fully, to come out in the best way, in your sort of strongest, truest self. But the information that I was in that was just so rock solid and was so accurate. And it pointed out that it took time. Maybe some people did it overnight, but I think for most of us, it was in secret. You were back and forth, you were struggling, you were, dabbling, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's really important to just acknowledge that with other people who are gay, is to sort of go back and, again, accompany someone through that process and see, how is that for you? And do you think, are there still some areas that, you haven't really worked it through? But often, and so this is the second part of your question, how would I work with someone who is not gay or lesbian and who wants to be a companion in spiritual direction for LGBTQ folk, is that I used that article with families, with parents, and it was so helpful for them to sort of see the process. But then I would also reflect to the people who were gay and who came out that you can't expect your parents to come out just because you sat them down and told them that you're gay or lesbian. They have to go through the exact same process that you went through. And it's going to take them as long, if not longer, to work the process. And I think that's really crucial insight, whether you're gay or whether you're wanting to work with gay people, is this processing that has to go on and allowing the time, however long it takes, and to be willing to give that on either side of the equation.
That reminds me of the experiences that people have coming to, and I'm sure they have this in your church community, but in our church community, lots and lots and lots of people say they feel like they came home. They felt like they were home when they got here. And that, I think, has to do with that. I don't know that that's anything that we do other than provide a space for people to experience their wholeness rather than their separation. Is there anything else you would like to add in regard to kind of the question I think that bubbles to mind for me is if someone is out there and they're unsure of their own spirituality and reconciling that with their sexual orientation. Is there anything you might want to say to address that?
If they're really looking for that connection, that there are these amazing people, and not just Unity, but today even, there are Catholic churches that are forming, there's Lutheran churches, there's Episcopal especially, or Methodist, but that there are so many places and so many people who would be worthwhile companions, who would be loving and kind, and not to be afraid. Like, don't let those allergies get the better of you. And one that just kills me, that hurts my heart so much, is the allergy to Jesus. Because talk about the most tender-hearted, magnetic, powerful love that being has for humanity and for all of us. It really hurts me to think that people are still laboring under this misconception of who and what Jesus was, this judge and coming back, the second coming and all this kind of stuff. When, it's the exact opposite, the most positive and affirming being that you could ever encounter.
Is there anything else on your heart that happens to be bubbling up?
Well, that was a big one.
I
almost choked a little bit there as I talked to Jesus, because having had that beautiful relationship as a child with him, and knowing now in Unity what we talked about as the Christ, and that it's our own nature too, that is such a healing. Coming out to the Christ nature that is within, the beloved of God. So
yes.
That's what our work is. I'm sure you experience too, that when people grow into their sense of love for themselves, then they can be all that they were meant to be in the world.
Yes. Well, that's beautiful and perfect. And I'm so grateful that you spent time with me today and visited with me today. And it has been a delight to open my heart to you and learn more from you. And thank you for letting us in on who you are.
Well, thank you for doing this work. And it's so admirable and so needed. And thank you for interviewing me.
Thanks for joining us for My Spiritual Friends. I'm your host, Joni Lorraine. If you enjoyed this experience, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast and YouTube channel. And thanks for joining us for My Spiritual Friends.